Facilities that make this program possible are provided by the City of Highland Park. Programs are produced independently by members of the community. The City of Highland Park is not affiliated with the following program or the producers of public access programming and is not responsible for the content. The following program does not reflect the opinions of the City of Highland Park.
Hello, and welcome to Cahnmann's Current Events Roundtable. Tonight, we have a wonderful guest that I think can really help us define what is really happening in Iran today. The Iran deal, is it pro or is it con? And my guest is Gary Midkiff, who is a professor at several universities. Amongst one is North Park University and Keller Graduate School. And you're going to be the deciding factor, Gary, on what is going to happen to Iran today.
Oh my goodness, that's a big responsibility, but thank you for inviting me anyway.
And thank you for joining us on Cahnmann's Roundtable. We have to really figure out, I'm getting a lot of headlines, and I want to read a little bit of the headlines of what's going on in Iran. I get one is sanctions against Iran crumble as America wrangles over the nuclear deal, why Senator Chuck Schumer is opposing the Iran deal. We have Iran publishes a book on how to outwit U.S. and destroy Israel. The Unconvincing Case in Favor of Iran Deal by Max Boot. Again, Senator Schumer's Illogical Case of the Iran Deal by Fareed Zakaria. Senator Menendez comes out against the Iran deal with Schumer. UN-Iran deal will let Tehran inspect site where it allegedly works on nukes, so they're going to do their own inspections. I mean, Gary, I have so many things here. One says one thing and one says the other thing, and I am also getting just as confused about it myself. I thought I understood it completely. I do the show, I run a current event roundtable discussion group, and it's so, it's the pro and con is getting harder and harder. And one of the things that I did get from you is negotiating with enemies can be very important. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that to our viewers, why negotiating with enemies, we have done it in years, all our former presidents did it, and why this could be an important thing in the Iran deal.
Negotiating with enemies is a requirement. You have two choices. Either you can negotiate with them or you can ignore them. If you ignore them, nothing good will happen. If you negotiate with them or at least talk with them and lead towards a negotiation, something good might happen. We can go back in recent history to Ronald Reagan negotiating with Gorbachev and Russia when they had missiles aimed at us, and we certainly regarded them as the enemy, but we negotiated with them because we each had something in terms of a common interest, and we each had something the other side wanted. It's no different now with Iran. Iran, as well as the U.S. and the other countries that negotiated with us, each have a common purpose. Now, we have to dig in a little bit to find that purpose, but we do. We want peace and prosperity, and that's driving both countries, both groups, if you will, and that helps to generate the deal that we have tentatively reached.
Yeah, the younger generation, I think some of our problems that I see is with the older generation in our government and the older generation in the Iranian government. They're the ones that are having the most difficulty on this. And I think when you in the younger generation, I think all want some kind of a negotiation because, in Iran, they walk around with their cell phones. The younger generation, they do exactly what our kids do here in the United States.
More than half of the Iranian population has been born since the hostage crisis in '79. For you and for me, we can remember Jimmy Carter and the hostage crisis. Half of the Iranians, for them, it's ancient history. So their focus is much more current, and the people in the street, if you will, in Iran are very happy that there is a tentative agreement because they don't have the carryover attitudes that some of the older people do.
So how do you convince the older, the generation in their particular government? The Khomeini, what is he? He is the...
He's the supreme religious leader of the country.
Right. Okay. How old, approximately how old
He's in his 80s.
Okay. So he, of course, is the older generation.
He is.
And he does not want any agreement. He said that he would like to destroy Israel. Does the younger generation feel that way? Because I noticed in this, we're getting, this is what we're getting on our news. We're watching them burn the American flag, burn the Israeli flag, and they keep concentrating on this group. Is it all of Iran, or is this just a small population? Because when you see something on television, it makes it look like everybody feels the same way.
Without going off on a tangent about media coverage and what generates media coverage, let's take a different tact in terms of talking about that. The folks in Iran and the folks in the U.S., neither of these two countries, and let's just refer to the U.S. for the moment, neither country is a monolith. Both of them have hardliners and more liberal folks. The hardliners in Iran, represented by the Revolutionary Guard, very definitely do not want a rapprochement with the U.S. In the U.S., we have some very conservative congressmen who very definitely do not want the two countries to get closer together. And they are very vocal. We even had senators send a letter to Iran on that topic some months ago. But that doesn't represent the majority view. The majority view is that we need to find some common ground, which is a basis for negotiation. Iran's economy shrunk 20% since the sanctions started. It brought Iran to the bargaining table. And at the bargaining table, then we can start to trade things that we want and things that they want, because they very definitely want to have a vibrant economy. The folks that are in power there, and they do have democratically elected government, the folks that are in power there know that their economy needs to grow, much like ours does. With the sanctions in place, that's not going to happen. That brought them to the negotiating table so that we could talk.
Okay, so why is it that we have, like Dermer, this is Ron Dermer, who is the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., and he was former senior advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu, who said, I don't think it's true that sanctions will unravel if the deal falls through. It threatens the survival of Israel. It endangers Israeli security. And he goes on to saying, I don't doubt the sincerity of Obama and Kerry. We just disagree with their judgment. Maybe you can talk about that. Is it shared by, the other Arabs in the neighborhood too about this, that they feel that their judgment isn't good? Why are we getting that from the former advisor or Israeli? He is the U.S. advisor to the U.S. ambassador from Israel to the United States. Why are we getting that rhetoric?
One of the points that I make to my foreign policy discussion groups is that it takes very hard work to be a good citizen in a democracy. Among the things you have to do is you have to get information from a variety of sources, not just a single source for news. So any one individual's point to me is not as important as trying to look more holistically at all the issues in play. When you were reading his comment, I made two notes. One has to do with economics. Let me talk about that first. The economics are such that in terms of sanctions, if we do not follow through on the agreement that has been signed by the countries, if our Congress doesn't agree, we are not going to be able to reimpose sanctions. The countries that are part of that negotiating deal see great economic benefit in trading with Iran. If we don't follow through and support the sanctions, the ending of the sanctions, we are going to be out by ourselves, possibly with Israel, because countries, particularly China and Russia, very much wish to trade with Iran.
I think they're trading already.
They are, and they would trade even more. Exerting leadership is going to be a little difficult for us if we've isolated ourselves. The second thing has to do with the existential threat of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons exist and they can be used for ill intent, obviously, but we all know that if any country uses nuclear weapons, there will be a retaliation and the result will be nuclear winter. It's not going to be anything that we would like to survive. So they exist, but they aren't going to be used. So, okay, let's say that Iran has a nuclear weapon. I do believe that the leadership in Iran is rational enough to say, I'm not going to launch a preemptive strike because if I do, I'm going to be obliterated. There is no sense. It's like the mutually assured destruction we had with the Soviets 30 years ago.
So do you think that it's really just a talking point when they say that we want to, to get Israel off the map, that we want to, and that's why we came to the table because we want to get rid of Israel. Do you think that's just rhetoric talking, that they're just threatening it? Is it real, or is it just bringing things to the bargaining table?
Let me go back to one of my favorite moments from the Republican presidential debate on Fox News, where the governor of Wisconsin said, on my first day in office, I'm going to bomb Iran. And the audience applauded and they were very excited. Now, do we really think
You're
that
talking about Scott Walker.
Scott Walker, is he really going to do that his first day in office? Of course he isn't going to do that. He said it, though, because it generated support, much like what some of the things are being said in Iran, because there is a grouping that goes, yes, we want to have death to the U.S. and Israel. Does that represent a majority view? I do not believe that it does.
So why did they supposedly that he wrote a book, which is, I have in my notes here, on getting rid of Israel. Khomeini wrote a book on, he says he published a book, it says Iran published a book on how to outwit U.S. and destroy Israel. But he wrote a book on this and makes his position clear from the start. Israel has no right to exist as a state. But he doesn't say that he wants to kill people. He wants to, when he says he just wants them out of Israel. He doesn't want to kill them, but he wants them to go somewhere. I don't know. Maybe Israel could be part of Florida. I don't know. I don't know where he's.
I think the Floridians might object to that just
yes.
a bit. Yes.
But I'm just wondering where he wants them to go, and why supposedly he wrote this book. And I did not read the book. You did not read the book. First of all, it is published in Farsi, so I guess we can't read it.
I guess we won't be reading the book then.
Unless
No,
you
we won't.
understand Farsi.
I do not know.
Okay. Is this he's just doing this so that he could be known as the leader in the land and is just going with that type of mentality? Or what is it all about? I don't get it.
The constitutional form of government in Iran is a bit different than ours. But let's take those two positions, Obama's as president, Khomeini as the supreme leader on the religious side. They can say whatever they want to, but to actually have policy executed, they need agreement from other parts of their government. We've seen Obama be frustrated because he can't get Congress to support things that he wants to do. And Khomeini is no different than that. He can make pronouncements. He can object to and actually can limit some of the laws that they might pass, but he can't make foreign policy take place. That's Rouhani, the elected leader, who wanted to have the negotiations take place. On both sides, we need to rely on the people that are parts of the government that execute, because I think there's more possibility there for the sides to work together. I really do.
We talked a little bit earlier, maybe people are still wondering why the hostages, there's 4 or 5 hostages, I think.
I believe there's 4, I believe, yes.
Hostages that are still there, and they weren't part of the deal or agreement. This is still not considered a treaty yet, am I right? It's in a deal or it's an agreement. It's not really a treaty.
Actually, it has been defined as an executive agreement because if it's called a treaty, there are certain constitutional rules that take place. It's an executive agreement. Obama gave Congress the right to vote on it because they asked for it, but it's not required in an executive agreement.
Okay, so why weren't they involved, even though it's nuclear and we're talking about nuclear? Why wasn't, sort of put in as an addendum or amendment or something in that particular agreement?
John Kerry gave an interview in Atlantic Magazine that was very good, and he talked in that interview about the negotiation process. And to paraphrase what Kerry said, the topic of those hostages came up almost every day. But one of the things we have to realize when we observe a negotiation from outside the negotiating room is that inside the room, both parties have to agree on what is or is not in the agreement. Unless both parties say it can be, it's not going to be there. We talked about it, they declined to have it. At some point in the negotiations, the math becomes we have a tentative agreement here, we have a couple of outliers over here. One side, and it could be us on some other point, say, if you want to include that, we can't agree to the rest of the deal. Then you get down to a decision much like our Constitutional Congress in 1787 when Benjamin Franklin said to the people that were there, we aren't going to solve slavery, so we have to pass this Constitution and solve slavery later because the Constitution is pretty good. Now that's kind of as far parallel Benjamin Franklin to here, but the logic is still the same, which is we have an agreement that all sides seem to agree with. These aren't included. We're going to have to deal with it later because the people negotiating didn't both agree to put it in.
Okay, because the most important agreement at this point is the nuclear agreement. And as you're saying, that could be put in a little bit later when they want to negotiate something else.
If the assumption is that this is the first formal dialogue with Iran, not the last, and I hope that it is. If it's the first formal dialogue, then there will be other dialogues to follow, much like what's happened with Cuba. We have started to open up relations with Cuba. There's a whole lot of other conversations that need to take place and probably will. If this is the only conversation we have with Iran, then our negotiators didn't do a good job.
See, so negotiations it's very interesting how negotiations go. People demand this right away, but it has to go a little bit slower. I'm going to play the devil's advocate again, and I think this is something that I mentioned a little earlier to you, and I want to bring it to my viewers, was, I see that there's nuclear facilities and nuclear bombs and nuclear everything in different countries. North Korea, Russia, England, India, Pakistan, Israel, missing something, there's other countries.
Many countries have nuclear weapons, yes.
Have nuclear weapons. And here I am, I'm Iran, and this is the devil's advocate because I'm not promoting a nuclear weapon for them, but I could see their point of view. Hey, everybody else gets it. Everybody else, is not having difficulty like we're having difficulty. Why are they not allowing us? We want to do it for our power. We also want to have it because we want to be part of, we want to be looked up at. We want to be one of the supreme powers also. Why are we being neglected, or why are we being denied, maybe that's the word, denied access to nuclear?
The countries that are nuclear, under the guidance of the United Nations, came to a conclusion which said there is a threat to mankind from nuclear weapons. A errant nuclear weapon, a mistake nuclear weapon, we have terrible consequences. We collectively believe that we need to limit nuclear weapons starting now, a few years ago. Now, we say that, and we have some countries that have them, some that don't. Iran was the country that was moving on a path that was putting them closest to having a nuclear weapon. It could have been Brazil. It could have been Nigeria, though unlikely. But the response would have been the same, which is, we, the other nations of the world, want you to stop, and we're going to put sanctions on you so that your current course of action is painful, and you will come and negotiate with us, which is what Iran did, because we don't want that to happen now. The hope very much is that if we start having more conversations with Iran and more economic integration with them, the need for them to have that will diminish. No country is going to give up nuclear weapons. You're Iran and I'm the United States. I'm not going to give up all of my weapons because at some level I really don't trust you. The same would be said in reverse. But in terms of more nations getting them, that's a threat to the entire world, and the world through the UN has said we have to stop here.
So do you think any other nations, if Iran, this negotiation, everything goes through, Saudi Arabia perhaps may want to have their own nuclear device?
If Iran were to acquire a nuclear weapon, we would start, and this is an interesting use of the phrase domino effect, but that's probably what would happen. Then Saudi Arabia is going to want one, then maybe Egypt wants one, and then we have broken our own understanding of what makes the world safer to do. We had to start somewhere to say that's enough, and Iran happened to be the country that was furthest along. That's where the sanctions took place.
You know what I don't understand is, why does everybody need these nuclear weapons? Because if only one country uses it, it's going to affect everybody. If the wind is going to blow it, especially anyone in the Middle East uses it, it's going to blow. If Russia decides to use a nuclear weapon, it's going to the wind is going to blow. It's not only going to blow to their enemy, but it's going to blow right back into their faces. What is the advantage of having these nuclear weapons? What is that all about?
A nuclear weapon is the ultimate defensive weapon. It's not an offensive weapon. It's a defensive weapon. Because if I am, whatever country I'm representing, if I am attacked and I am nuclear capable, I will retaliate nuclear and I will obliterate you. Now, the net result of that is that everyone's obliterated, but the threat of that says to a rational country, perhaps it's not a good offensive weapon. My fear is much more of a rogue organization, which is not a physical state, having access to a nuclear weapon, and suddenly,
like ISIS.
Perhaps suddenly New York Harbor blows up because someone managed to get that's actually much more concern to me than a country acting offensively with a nuclear weapon.
Because isn't ISIS getting some nuclear material? I heard that they were getting material. Maybe they're going to have access to a small nuclear type weapon.
They might, I don't know. The flow of information is so irregular and difficult to cross-check. I just don't know. You might be right. I don't know.
I was just reading by Thomas Friedman that the U.S., one of the ways that maybe make Israel feel a little bit better, especially Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as far as maybe that he could, and you probably said something that may not happen under this president. However, the latest 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs, which are capable of taking out any nuclear technology Iran decides to hide underground. And if they do get this, they will give Iran the message, and perhaps Iran will never use it. That may be just the safeguard that Israel has, just in case Iran decides to use it. What do you think about what Thomas Friedman, his voice as far as what he thinks would be a good idea?
I have one comment on that, and then I have one point that I want to make. The comment on the
Yes.
Friedman article, who I read regularly and who I enjoy very much reading his commentary, would be this. Netanyahu and Obama will not be...
Something is a signal.
That just happened.
And so one of the things that we should be talking about is what is this Thomas Friedman thing that we need to, what we need to do?
So let me comment on the Friedman thing, a variation on that, and then let me get to the point that I wanted to make. In terms of Friedman, I don't believe that Netanyahu will successfully get along with our current president till the end of his term. The only chance we have, assuming Netanyahu stays in office, is for him to have a better relationship with our next president, because I don't think he's going to have one with Obama. Whatever the cause is, whatever the issue is, I don't think that's going to take place. So if bunker bombs are a good idea, and I don't know that they are, it's not going to happen in the next 400 and some days before our next election or the next president is installed. I want to go to a point that I wanted to make from before, which had to do with something, again, referring to that Republican debate, which I found most interesting. A couple of the candidates used the phrase the American century. And that suggests that we are going to lead the world in the 21st century the way that we did in the 20th century. And I think that rather than the phrase American century, we would be better served by the phrase collaborative century, because we need to collaborate with other major powers in the world if we're going to have a safer place. So we need to remind ourselves that although Kerry was a negotiator, there were other parties at the table, Russia and China among them, on our side of the table. We need to exert leadership in a collaborative fashion, not just the old Teddy Roosevelt imperial model, which is if it's good for the U.S., it's good for the world. No, not necessarily. It needs to be good for the world to begin with.
That sounds like General Boomos.
It might, but it was something Teddy Roosevelt referred to.
So, what are other countries? What is their opinion about what's going on here? First of all, do you think it's going to pass the nuclear deal or nuclear agreement, as far as our Congress is concerned?
Every other country that has taken a vote about the agreement has come out in favor of it. The UN took a vote, and the individual countries that have chosen to make a statement have all been in favor. We are the only country at the moment which is uncertain about what we want to do, other than Iran, about what we might want to do. My personal prediction, and we'll certainly know if this is correct, because it's going to be on tape now, is that our Congress will reject it, Obama will veto the rejection, and the Congress will not be able to overturn his veto. Therefore, we will support it, but we will have a black eye, if you will, because our Congress will have come out with a statement that says, we don't really trust this deal.
So what message does that give to other countries?
The message it gives is that Obama has vision and foresight, and our Congress is a few steps behind.
So, but if they don't abide by all the rules and regulations, what about the SNAP?
The phrase that Obama used in his press conference the day after the agreement was announced, that we can snap back sanctions, isn't accurate, because that would require every country that was part of the sanctioning body to immediately reimpose. They don't have an incentive to do that. They wish to trade with Iran. They are comfortable with the agreement as it is. They don't see the